Sophia froze as Alejandro's hand shoved her toward the front door, his sneer sharp and deliberate. "No man will desire you but me," he spat, his words heavy with the arrogance that had defined their marriage. Isabella, his mistress, followed closely, her eyes gleaming with triumph, as though every ounce of Sophia's shock fed her own sense of superiority. The sprawling hallway, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a cage, echoing with the cruel rhythm of her humiliation. Her hands grazed the ornate banister, trembling as if gripping the last tether to her dignity. The guests had arrived earlier for what they thought would be a cheerful gathering, but the tension now swallowed every corner of the room. Conversations faltered, and whispered glances darted between Sophia, Alejandro, and Isabella. Alejandro's laughter rang out, confident, dismissive as he and Isabella exchanged smug smiles. He reached for Sophia's arm, intending to force her further toward the threshold, and in that instant, something inside her snapped. She wasn't powerless, not truly. As he yanked at her coat, she felt the subtle weight of a paper tucked deep in her purse, nearly forgotten in the chaos of the evening. The house, Alejandro assumed, belonged to him. Every extravagant detail, every expensive fixture he thought was his to wield. But Sophia knew the truth. The deed, the ownership, everything legal was under her name. A small, quiet victory, yet one that could unravel Alejandro's arrogance completely. Isabella's heels clicked against the polished floor, a cruel accompaniment to Alejandro's self-satisfied grin. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Sophia's voice was quiet but carried a steel beneath it. Alejandro paused, amusement flickering across his face. He underestimated her, as always. With deliberate calm, Sophia stepped back just enough to retrieve her purse, the motion slow, deliberate, drawing the gaze of the guests. Alejandro's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" he demanded, but his voice lacked its usual edge, tension creeping in as he sensed an unfamiliar shift. Sophia pulled out the neatly folded papers and let them slide onto the marble floor. "Do you want to see who really owns this house?" Her voice was steady, cutting through the room like a sharp blade. A hush fell over the gathering. Alejandro and Isabella bent forward, incredulous. He laughed nervously, a sound tinged with disbelief, scanning the documents. Each page confirmed her claim, and each signature and stamp dismantled the illusion of his control. The smirk on Isabella's face faltered, replaced by a flicker of panic. Alejandro's jaw tightened, the color draining from his face as the realization set in. Every boast, every word of dominance, every cruel taunt, it meant nothing against the simple truth of legality. Sophia straightened, her shoulders squared, her eyes steady and unyielding. For the first time, the room didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a stage, and Sophia had claimed the role she was always meant to play, the one in control. Alejandro stumbled backward, and Isabella looked at him, uncertain. The power dynamic had shifted, subtle but unmistakable, and the audience, previously silent witnesses, now sensed the change. The woman they had underestimated, laughed at, and tried to diminish, had silently prepared for this moment. Sophia's lips curved into a small, controlled smile. This was only the beginning. Alejandro would learn, as Isabella would, that arrogance had limits, and underestimating her had been their first and gravest mistake. The evening air outside the house was crisp, but Sophia barely noticed the chill as she stepped onto the driveway. Alejandro and Isabella had stormed off in a flurry of arrogance and indignation, certain that their cruelty had left her powerless. Yet, as the taillights faded, she allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The papers she had revealed inside the house were only the first move. The real game, the reclamation of control, was just beginning. Sophia returned to the quiet of her small, rented apartment, a temporary refuge that felt strangely empowering. She spread the documents across the table, the weight of her own planning finally sinking in. Every detail of the house, every clause in the ownership papers, had been carefully checked and double-checked. Alejandro had assumed that she would always remain dependent, naive, and submissive. How little he knew her. She had anticipated his arrogance, predicted his overconfidence, and now the stage was set for her full reclamation. She poured herself a glass of wine, letting the rich burgundy color anchor her thoughts. It wasn't just about the house. It was about the humiliation, the betrayal, the sheer audacity of being kicked out while the man she had loved flaunted a mistress in her own home. Sophia's anger was sharp, but beneath it, her mind worked with precision. This wasn't a matter of revenge alone, it was about strategy. She would reclaim her dignity on her terms. The first step was communication. Sophia picked up her phone and called Elena, her lawyer and longtime friend. Elena answered almost immediately, her voice calm but curious. Sophia, is everything all right? I need your advice and your presence. Alejandro and his accomplice just tried to push me out of my house. They didn't know it's in my name. I need to make sure they don't try anything further. Sophia's voice was steady, the edge of control unmistakable. Elena's pause was brief, but filled with understanding. Bring everything. Documents, witnesses if you can. We'll make sure your rights are undeniable. Hanging up, Sophia allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The humiliation of earlier still stung, but it had also sharpened her. Every insult, every sneer, and every belittling remark Alejandro had made now fueled her strategy. She would not act rashly. Impulsive confrontation was exactly what he would expect. She needed precision, visibility, and undeniable proof. The next day, she returned to her house, this time with Elena. The driveway was empty, the interior calm yet filled with the lingering echoes of yesterday's confrontation. Alejandro had left in haste, assuming she had no leverage. Sophia and Elena moved through the rooms, placing copies of the ownership papers and other legal documentation where they could be easily presented if needed. Every detail of Alejandro's prior assumptions would now be laid bare. His arrogance, his reliance on fear, his misjudgment of Sophia's strength. By late afternoon, and she began contacting the few trusted neighbors who had witnessed the previous night's events. Sophia's plan was simple: transparency and exposure. She would not allow Alejandro to twist the narrative, nor would Isabella's smugness go unchallenged. One by one, the neighbors expressed quiet admiration and agreement to bear witness if the confrontation escalated. Word of Alejandro's humiliation was already seeping through the community, and Sophia knew that perception mattered as much as legality. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sophia stood in the living room, her posture tall, her expression composed. She could feel the tension building, not yet with Alejandro, but within herself, a quiet, simmering anticipation. This was the moment where patience met opportunity. She had carefully chosen her timing, her evidence, and her witnesses. Alejandro's overconfidence was a weapon she would turn against him. Her phone buzzed. A message from Alejandro, curt and almost desperate. "We need to talk." Sophia read it and let it linger, savoring the shift in power. For months, he had dictated terms, controlled interactions, and assumed dominance. Now the very man who had tried to humiliate her was reaching out, unknowing of the full scope of her preparation. Sophia smiled, a controlled, deliberate smile. She responded simply, "Meet me here at 7 p.m. Bring whoever you feel is necessary." The message was neutral, yet it carried the weight of her new authority. She had not raised her voice, had not shouted, had not lashed out. Control, she knew, was far more potent than rage. As evening approached, Alejandro arrived with Isabella, both radiating arrogance and expectation. Oh, Alejandro expected submission, a flustered apology, perhaps confusion. Instead, they were met with Elena, papers neatly organized on the table, and Sophia herself, calm, poised, and fully in command. Sophia gestured toward the documents. "As you can see," she said quietly, her tone carrying absolute authority, "the house is legally mine. Every assumption you made, every attempt to push me out, every word of control, none of it has any legal standing. I suggest you leave now or risk further exposure." Alejandro's face went pale, disbelief flickering across his features. Isabella's smirk faltered. They had expected confrontation, but not this level of strategy, not this calm, unwavering command. Sophia's eyes met Alejandro's, unflinching. "Power is not always what it appears to be," she continued. You assumed arrogance and fear could dictate outcomes. You were wrong. And now you must face the consequences of underestimating me." A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the shuffle of papers as Alejandro and Isabella realized the depth of their miscalculation. The first chapter of Sophia's reclamation was complete. She had shifted from humiliated victim to strategist, from powerless to formidable. And this confrontation, this revelation, was only the beginning. The evening air carried a quiet tension as Alejandro and Isabella returned to the house, their confidence already fraying. Alejandro still clutched the illusion that he could bully and intimidate his way through any situation, but even he felt the subtle shift from the moment he stepped into the driveway. Sophia waited calmly, her posture straight, her expression composed, every movement measured and deliberate. She had prepared for this moment for hours, mapping every word, every gesture, every pause. Tonight, the arrogance that had once seemed impenetrable would crumble. Elena stood beside her, documents neatly arranged on the table, ready to be presented to any who might question the legitimacy of Sophia's claim. Sophia had also invited a few neighbors who had witnessed the previous night's humiliation. Their presence was not just to bear witness, but to reinforce that Alejandro's power was not only false, but publicly contested. The stakes were higher than ever. Alejandro's pride, his mistress's smugness, and the judgment of those around them collided in a tense, almost unbearable atmosphere. Alejandro strode forward, trying to mask the unease in his posture with his usual arrogance. "Sophia," he began, his voice slightly strained. This isn't necessary. Let's talk." He glanced at Isabella, who nodded encouragingly, though her eyes betrayed her doubt. Sophia's voice cut through the tension, calm but steel sharp. "Talk? There's nothing to talk about, Alejandro. Everything you assumed about me, about this house, about control, was wrong." She gestured to the neatly arranged legal documents on the table. "These papers show clearly who holds ownership. Every attempt to intimidate me, every cruel word you've spoken, carries no weight here." Alejandro's face paled as he scanned the documents again. His eyes widened as he realized the depth of his miscalculation. Isabella's smirk faded entirely, replaced with panic. The neighbors, quiet until now, they leaned forward, murmuring to each other as the truth became undeniable. Every witness, every signature, every clause solidified Sophia's control. "You can't be serious," Alejandro stammered. "You think a few papers can—" Sophia interrupted, her voice steady and commanding. "I don't think, Alejandro. I know. And you and Isabella need to leave, now." Isabella tried to interject, her voice sharp, but it faltered against Sophia's unwavering gaze. The confidence that once radiated from them had evaporated, leaving only uncertainty and fear. Alejandro's jaw tightened. He had underestimated her, as he always had, and the consequences were beginning to sink in. Sophia continued, her tone unyielding. "Your arrogance, your cruelty, your attempts to belittle me, they've blinded you. You assumed fear and submission would keep me in line. But you were wrong. Power is not given by intimidation. It is earned, protected, and exercised wisely. And I have it now." The silence in the room was deafening. Alejandro's attempts at defiance faltered, and Isabella's gaze dropped, the reality of their failure settling like a weight in the air. Sophia had not raised her voice, had not begged, had not shouted. Every gesture, every word had been deliberate, exposing their miscalculation and reversing the power dynamic completely. Finally, Alejandro took a hesitant step back, his shoulders stiff, his face pale with humiliation. Isabella followed, her eyes avoiding Sophia's, recognizing the shift that had occurred. The neighbors, previously passive observers, now offered small nods of acknowledgement, reinforcing Sophia's victory without her needing to speak further. And Sophia allowed herself a momentary smile. She had not only reclaimed her home, but she had also restored her dignity. Alejandro and Isabella, once confident in their dominance, now faced the consequences of underestimating her. Every insult, every act of cruelty had been met with patience, strategy, and intelligence, and now, justice. As Alejandro and Isabella exited the house, their defeat silent but unmistakable, Sophia stepped to the window, watching them disappear down the street. The night felt still, almost reverent, as if acknowledging the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. She turned back to the documents on the table, the papers that had symbolized not just legal ownership, but the reclaiming of her life and self-respect. Elena approached, placing a reassuring hand on Sophia's shoulder. "You did it," she said softly, as admiration in her eyes. "You were calm, deliberate, and strong. You've reclaimed everything they tried to take from you." Sophia nodded, feeling a surge of empowerment she had never experienced before. "This is just the beginning," she murmured, not with threat, but with certainty. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, and arrogance, and she had emerged victorious. Alejandro had learned the hard way that underestimating someone like her came with consequences. Isabella had seen firsthand that smugness and manipulation could crumble in the face of intelligence and patience. The house, once a battleground of cruelty and fear, now felt like a sanctuary reclaimed. Sophia moved through each room, breathing in the familiar scents, the quiet comfort of control, and the thrill of victory. She had turned humiliation into power, the betrayal into strategy, and fear into a weapon she wielded with precision. As the evening settled, Sophia stood in the grand hallway, the same place where Alejandro had once sneered at her and tried to push her out. The contrast between then and now was stark. She was no longer the woman who trembled under their cruelty. She was the woman who commanded respect, whose intelligence and patience had overturned arrogance itself. The victory was complete, not in confrontation alone, but in the quiet, unwavering confidence that radiated from her every gesture. Tonight, Alejandro and Isabella had learned that power could not be taken by force, only assumed by those who truly understood it. And Sophia, calm and victorious, knew that this night marked not just the reclaiming of a house, but the reclaiming of her life, her dignity, and her unshakable strength.